Good morning, everybody. Welcome to this morning's webinar. And we have esteemed speaker, Mr. Joel Hanrahan, with us, and also our panelists, Seong Yong, Zikang, to join us later to answer all your questions about the value of intangible assets. And Joel will be making a presentation on making the valuable visible so that you can look after all the IP, intangible assets in your company, whether is it in valuation, in buy-sell, merging transactions, you can look after this valuable areas in your company. So the organizers for helping in putting this event together, we have ourselves IES INCA, IIPCC, Singapore, and ACE to help us with this organization of this event. And our supporting partners, IPOS International, EverEdge, Valeris, and also Holomic, as well as Brands for Good. Yeah. So today's program will have an introduction to IES INCA, and then brief one on IIPCC, as well as to ACE SG. After that, we'll have Joel to do the presentation on making the valuable visible. And we'll have, after that, presentation to IPOS International, a brief one, and then introduce the panelists who will take your questions on the topic of intangible assets. And then we'll can hang around for some informal networking before we end at 12. So let me begin to introduce about IES. For those who are new, IES is the Institution of Engineers Singapore. It's a national body for engineers. It's been around since 1966. Our mission is to support the science and professional engineering for the well-being of mankind. In Singapore, we represent engineers and the heart and voice of engineers in Singapore and also in the global stage. Yeah. Okay, so that's IES. In 2019, IES embarked on the journey to start IES INCA, which stands for IES Incubator Accelerator. Our work is to support engineers and technology companies who are doing tech commercialization. We hope in doing so, we can build a strong engineering technology company that can start from Singapore and go to the global market. So that's our mission, to support this science, technology, engineering ventures in engineering translation, and to accelerate products to market and achieve success. And in doing so, we hope to build a vibrant engineering venture and entrepreneurship community that really transform life through the technology that they bring to market. Yeah. Yeah. So what does IES INCA do as an incubator? We provide support in engineering translation, mentorship, business support training. We are looking to help our IES members, engineers who are building their tech ventures, corporate SME spin-offs, IHL spin-offs, to grow their MVP through scale-up activities into mass production or into mass rollout. Yeah. And in our work, we also connect them to investors, business networks, customer and market. And we also look out for corporate SME problem statements, industry problem statements, innovation opportunities, which we want to put in front of our engineers to hope that they can find some matching with their experience and build new ventures with the technology that's out there. Yeah. So that's our activity. A key part of it is helping the companies in through mentoring, identifying their needs in the business, and assign them mentors, whether is it business mentor, finance mentor, technology mentors, manufacturing mentors, or even go-to-market mentors overseas that can help them. And companies that come through our program exit incubation when they have the executable business plan and the necessary funding to execute that plan. So our focus areas for IES INCA is the infrastructure technology, building-related materials, processes and facilities management, IoT for industrial purpose and smart cities, robotics automation, and clean tech sustainability technologies. So these are some of our IES INCA partners. We work closely with Enterprise Singapore, IPI, A-Star, and universities, ACE and also industrial organizations like ISCA, which is the equivalent of IES in the CFO and accounting space. Yeah, so they provide mentors for us and also provide a pool of investor network. So our programs, in summary, are in the incubation acceleration, helping companies to scale up. We also run technopreneur training courses to help our engineers to gain new skills in business so that they can be all-rounded technopreneur. And lastly, in business lending programs, now that COVID is over, companies from overseas want to lend into Singapore in the engineering technology space, we welcome them. We provide them localization support and also helping them to globalize from Singapore to the rest of the world and the region. So for 2023, we focus on corporate innovation as well as a new initiative. We want to help engineering companies up and down the line, from SMEs to large corporates, in innovation if they want to grow, so we can help them through the use of our consultants. And lastly, we provide links to overseas markets through our market mentors and partners who can help them go to Southeast Asia and the rest of the world. These are our innovation consultants, partners that are strong in tech commercialization, digital transformation, and commercializing technology from universities that we can tap on. So that is what IES INCA is about, and welcome everybody to today's webinar. I will pass on the sharing to Intink from ACE SG, who will give you an introduction about the organization.
Very warm hello to everyone here in the IES INCA community. I'm Intink from ACE, so just quickly sharing what ACE is about. So ACE stands for the Action Community for Entrepreneurship. We are the national voice for the startup ecosystem here in Singapore. We are a trade association for startups. So we advocate for the interests of startups and members. We catalyze innovation and collaboration amongst ecosystem players, and we are enabling capability and capacity building. So I'll run through quickly with you our 5 pillars and what we do. So ACE has 5 pillars. So namely the startups. We really support startup growth in collaboration with the government and also with our stakeholders, and we serve as the bridge between the government and startups in relation to the public sector. So I'll share with you a bit about what we do later on as well. And also through corporations, working with corporations to ideate needs and also to co-create innovation programs, and risk capital to bring together venture capitalists and risk capital firms to support startup funding needs. And also we advocate for youth entrepreneurship through our youth, so working very closely with institutes of higher learning as well. Yeah, so just run a quick snapshot of what it looks like. So supporting startups, public sector, corporations, risk capital, and IHL. So in a nutshell, what we do, I think, in relation to the 5 pillars that I've shared earlier on. So in the public sector, and bring startups closer to the government, and also to have them know what government support is available out there, and whether the government is hearing on the ground, the problems faced by the startups. So we bring the startups closer to the public sector through our Ideas in Action, and also our monthly roundtable sessions with MPs, with our chairman, ACE chairman, and also corporation through our corporate memberships, where we bring our corporate partners closer to our startup members, and also fundraise, which is a program that helps startups meet investors, and also Inspiration, which is and a targeted learning journey program for students, and also for any students who want to learn about entrepreneurship to come through this program in Inspiration. Yeah, so just a snapshot as well what we do. So Raise Cam is related to the risk capital and also fundraising and investment. So Base Cam is how we start our day, how we help our day one founders through giving them the core skills that they need for impact and for scalability. And also this is a snapshot of how the founder journey looks like. If you come through, I think this will relate more for day one founders actually, but I think I want to share with you our membership program. Actually, if you are interested to join us, I think this would be the best way to get plugged into our ACE ecosystem, where we are also partners with IES INCA, for example. So it's really a tightly knit ecosystem. So if you're interested, I think you can I'll share the contact link as well later, but just to share with you what our membership looks like. So once you are a member, you get plugged into the ecosystem. You have access to all the collaboration opportunities which I just shared earlier, and also if any events that we have, you have priority access, and also I think preference rates, and also key network system. So if you ever need help or anything, come speak to us, speak to our founders and residents here, and also members discount on co-working spaces or spaces that we have here at ACE. So another snapshot of what it looks like here. So fundraising, international and corporate innovation engagement, especially for the international side. I think if you're looking to expand overseas, ACE has many international partners who are ready and to help you scale and also to bring you overseas. So I think if that's something that you're looking at, please do come speak to us and we can explore how we can help you with this. And also for anyone who might be the international looking to join us as an international member, other than all the previous perks that I've mentioned earlier, there's also Entre Pass as well, and also we also connect you with our international community. Yeah, I'm not going too fast, but I'll wrap up here. So hope everyone can just maybe take a screenshot of this slide, or just take note or start scanning, and then if there's anything, please connect with us through these portals. Yeah, thank you. Over to you, Andy.
Okay, thank you so much, Inky, for that presentation on for that presentation on ACE SG. Now I'd like to invite our guest speaker, Joel, from EverEdge to share more about his experience in making the valuable visible and his experience in intangible assets. EverEdge is a expert in the intangible asset valuation and also helping companies to dig right into where their value is in the IP that they have done in their work. So over to you, Joel.
Well, as Andy just mentioned, I'm Joel. I'm the Managing Director of EverEdge Global. Here's just a little whistle-stop tour of some of the things we'll discuss today. We'll go pretty quickly, but obviously with the panel discussion, and anybody's free to email me afterwards or give me a buzz and ask any questions. So don't worry if you've got something that comes up today as part of the discussion, feel free to either ask it today or later on is fine. This is EverEdge, about 2,500 plus engagements around the world with some of the largest organizations in the world, right down to startups and scale-ups and entrepreneurs. We have an excellent net promoter score, if you're familiar with that customer satisfaction ranking. That's actually 11 years now amongst the top IP strategists globally, and we're the only ones in Asia Pacific to have that ranking for that long. Offices in key locations around the world, and such is and I'm sure my fellow panelists will agree, such is the often hidden value in intangible assets going unused in an organization that we're confident enough to say for every dollar our clients give us, we give them at least $10 back in value. So we basically help our clients do 6 things: identify all of their intangible assets fully, assess them for their strength and weakness, give them a detailed protection strategy around that, help them commercialize into the market much better, much more effectively, give them a detailed valuation of their business or of their intangible assets or both, and actually help them then go on their path to market, be that securitizing against their assets, better pricing their product in the market, raising capital off the back of it, etc. So why are intangible assets something you should pay attention to? Why are they so critical? Well, on this histogram here, you see the S&P 500 over the last 50 odd years split between intangible assets in the blue and tangible assets in the yellow. What that basically says is, if you jump in a time machine and go back 50 years ago, intangible assets didn't really account for much in an organization. It was more about the tangibles, the factory, the cars, the machinery, the manufacturing was all onshore. But now you fast forward to today, on average, intangible assets account for 90% of an organization's value. And it doesn't matter if you're talking about big organizations or small. Some of the biggest organizations in the world, you think your Microsofts, your Amazons, your Googles, your Apples, they're greater than 98% intangible, right down to sort of startups and scale-ups and who are often 100% intangible. What this basically says is there's been a massive migration of value and risk to intangible assets. Now, when we identify ourselves as intangible asset specialists, people usually say, I know what you mean IP and patents and trademarks. And there's no doubt that's a part of it. right? But what our basic message to our clients and anybody else is that intangible assets are all throughout an organization, and they are primarily driving your growth and your performance. Now, most clients we encounter usually have about 9 or 10 out of the 12 of these key categories, and it's usually 5 or 6 are doing some serious heavy lifting for the business. And what I mean by that is, if you took out one of these categories, if you took them out and all of a sudden that business couldn't use them anymore, it would be significant to the business. There would be significant losses or disruption. Now, it's important to note that each of these categories have a discrete purpose in the organization. They also have a discrete value. So they can be valued individually, but sort of like fingers on a hand, not only do they have a discrete purpose, but together they form a powerful portfolio effect. And we'll talk about that soon. Now, they're also known as different things. So you might be thinking, well, intangible assets, aren't they called IP? Yes, they are. You know, as IPOS would certainly call it that. Obviously, accountants call it goodwill. You know, so they're called different things, but effectively, the sort of name of it shouldn't confuse you. What often confuses people is called intangible assets, right? They're invisible. They're basically everything that you can't drop on your foot or kick with your toe. And that fools people into thinking they're not real assets, right? But they are real assets that have real value, and they directly affect your margins and market share. And that's key. And there's a sort of simple thought experiment you can do to draw out this. Well, let's pretend I gave you a free steel mill, right? You can have the mill, you can have the factory, the machinery, and the stock. The only catch is I'll keep all the intangible assets, right? So I'll keep the customer and supplier relationships. I'll keep the software required to run the machines, the approvals and certifications, the brand, the data coming out of the machines. What you'll quickly realize, despite what an accountant might tell you, is all I've given you is a giant liability, because all the real value in that mill is in the ability to run it safely and efficiently, and I've kept that in all the intangible assets. Now, what's interesting about this is the world over, we're still wedded to looking at an organization's performance through the lens of a balance sheet or a P&L. And what that's leading to is a massive gap then between what you'll see on the balance sheet and P&L and what's actually the engine of that organization driving its value and its growth and its risk. And there's actually a really simple reason for this. If an accountant looks at a business today, one of 3 things are going to happen. Primarily, that's because the accounting standards that we all use today, from Norway to New Zealand and Singapore, were designed for an industrial age, the sort of age you see in the picture there, you know, fixed asset, inventory-led businesses. And whilst the economy has moved on to the point now the biggest businesses in the world are leading the way in digitizing, in Internet of Things, in AI, the accounting standards haven't kept up with it. So as I said at the outset, if an accountant looks at a business now, when it comes to intangible assets, one of 3 things is going to happen. Firstly, they'll look for the assets and they won't even be there, right? So as far as the balance sheet is concerned, this organization doesn't even have any intangible assets. Secondly, they're put on as goodwill, which is this big amorphous mass. It just sits on the balance sheet and depreciates. No one knows what sits inside it. Or thirdly, they're put on as cost. And the reason why cost is the worst of all these 3 is because there's no correlation between what something costs and its value, which means that the number on the balance sheet is almost certainly incorrect. Now, a good way to think about that is, think of a desk that you might be sitting at. Right? There's a direct correlation between the inputs of that desk, so the wood on top and the legs, and its value. You might have paid $100 for it. It's never going to be worth $100,000. But intangible assets do have the ability to scale like that. And what it basically means is, if the balance sheet and the P&L are not a good indication, then investors, advisors, and even the organization themselves are focusing in the wrong place when it comes to an organization's value. And the intangible assets then become like an elephant in the room. Now, here's a good live example for this, right? This is Instagram. This is a picture of the 12 staff of Instagram on the day it was sold. Now, you might remember this. But on the day it was sold, it had zero revenue. So it was pre-revenue. It had no tangible assets. It had these 12 staff, and it had no track record to speak of, right? It was only 20 months old. Do you remember what it was bought for by Mark Zuckerberg? $1 billion. Now, on the very same day, right, Main Freight was also bought. Now, Main Freight was a totally different story. Had almost $2 billion in revenue, $1 billion in tangible assets, thousands of staff, and an excellent decades-long track record. Does anybody remember what Main Freight was sold for on the same day? Also $1 billion. Now, that begs the question, how could those organizations both be worth the same thing, right? The same amount? And there's actually a pretty easy explanation for that. You see, all of the tangible assets that Main Freight had, they weren't able to scale at exponential growth rates. They scale at this sort of rate and maybe give the business, if the business is smart enough to build off the back of those assets, an ability to make more money, but they're not going to scale exponentially, whereas intangible assets do have the ability to do so. And that's what Zuckerberg realized, obviously, when he bought it for $1 billion, that particularly the network effect, which is an intangible asset category within Instagram, had the ability to scale. And was he right? Well, not long after he bought it for $1 billion, it was independently valued for $7 billion. Recently, Instagram's been valued at $125 billion. So obviously, he got that right. Now, an important thing to note here, if you're seeking investment, is that capital chases this ability to grow exponentially. That's where the investors are keen to put their dollars. Now, proof of that is in the years it took certain businesses to reach $1 billion in market cap. Now, here's just an example of some of those organizations. Now, they're all great brands, right? All 12 of these organizations are great brands. They're making a lot of money. But do you notice the difference between the ones who got there much quicker and the ones that took much longer? Well, you'll notice a distinct difference in the amount of intangible assets that they have and the way that they've leveraged those. So that's proof that capital, investor capital, chases this ability to grow exponentially, and intangible assets are crucial to that journey. So what's the result we find? Well, we find pretty much 4 things with the organizations we speak to. It doesn't matter where they are in the world, and it doesn't matter their size. Often, they don't fully understand the intangible assets that they own. Now, if you don't understand all the intangible assets you own, and if every asset has risks, we can understand that. And if 90% of your growth is around intangible assets now, well, then it makes sense that that's where the majority of the risk is going to be too. So if you don't fully understand the intangible assets you own, you can't wrap your head around the risks. You also can't wrap your head around how it's impacting your financial results. Now, we showed before that the balance sheet isn't any guide. Well, what about the P&L? Well, let's use a very basic example, right? Let's say Andy and I walk into a market in, say, Bangladesh, and we both buy a T-shirt for $2. But Andy comes home and he sews a Prada label on his T-shirt. Well, all of a sudden, Andy's T-shirt's worth $100. Right? But you think of how a P&L would represent that. It would say revenue $100, cost of goods sold $2, and the reason for the $98 profit, which we all know is the Prada label, the brand, well, that doesn't even show up. So even in the simplest of examples, financial records can't show the link between an intangible asset and its impact on financial results. And of course, we're not in business to do those 3 things that are on screen there. We're in business to do this, right? To fully unlock the value in our intangible assets, to make more money on it, to commercialize it more effectively and use it as a key in raising capital. So what's just a quick recap on that? Intangible assets account for more than 90% of company value today. They're the primary drivers of performance and risk and growth, and they scale it on a completely different level to tangible assets. Now, how can they drive your competitive edge? Well, intangible assets, that constellation, so all together, they directly affect two different things that you have at your disposal in an organization. One, the sort of size of the opportunity that you can go for, and the fundamental business models that you can use to go and get that opportunity. And they also directly affect these other key elements of the success of your business. Now, let's just take a look at this on a simple sort of X and Y axis. Now, let's just use the bottom axis as product failure and product success, and the top as a strong intangible asset versus a weak intangible asset position. Right? Now, if you have a weak intangible asset position, no one's going to copy you. And if you have a strong, sorry, my apologies. Let me backtrack. If you have a bad product, your product's a failure, it doesn't matter if you have a weak or strong intangible asset position. Nobody's going to copy it, so it doesn't matter if you're protected or not. But let's assume no one on this call has a bad product or service, right? So you're all got a successful product. Well, if you have a weak intangible asset position, if it's not appropriately leveraged, if it's not appropriately protected, will you leave yourself open to everybody copying you? Now, that will restrict you, that was going to dilute your market significantly. It's going to increase competition significantly, possible competition a lot more sophisticated than you, which is going to drive down your margin and your ability to earn a lot of money. Now, if your product's a success and you have a strong intangible asset position, you make it very, very difficult to copy. That gives you sustainable margins. It allows you to operate in that top right quadrant for much longer and to have premium market share and premium profits without major dilution. Now, it's important to note that this product success line, the extent to which you can strengthen your intangible asset position, directly affects these things. So it's not like you can think, oh yeah, this is interesting, but I'll get to it, when I get to it. But I just got to sort of get back to my sort of machinery now, because that's the real thing I'm selling. This is what's real. This is what's real and fundamental about your business and what has to be gotten right. Now, how do you determine what the right commercialization strategy is for you? Well, there are three fundamental ways that you can go to market. You can deploy your product in the market. That means you're sort of making it yourself, you're manufacturing it yourself, and you sell it yourself. You can make it and allow someone else to sell it for you, which is a typical license arrangement, or you can sell your business and somebody else takes it to market. Now, intangible assets directly affect which model is going to be available to you. Now, on another simple X and Y axis, let's have the bottom axis as the total amount you put in, your total investment in risk, in resource and time. And let's put the vertical axis as to what you get out of it, right? The absolute reward. Generally speaking, the ratio is this. In terms of input that you have to put in, the maximum output. Now, it doesn't make any one of those three options any better or worse, because obviously it costs you more, and you have to invest more to get that bigger gain at the end. But intangible assets can directly affect this, and here's how. They can bend this curve to give you the ability to get a greater reward for less investment, and similarly, they can bend the curve down. So let's look it up. If you have a strong intangible asset position, you can have each of these three fundamental business models available to you in quicker time and for a better reward. Now, similarly, if you haven't bothered to strengthen your intangible asset position, it can bend this curve down. But it also does something else to the business models available to you. Selling and licensing is no longer on the table. Nobody needs to buy your business off you or license your product off you because they can just go and do it themselves. You haven't bothered to strengthen that foundational piece. So really all that's available to you is to deploy your product into the market and at those subsistence margins as well. This is the worst possible position to be in. Now, I'm going pretty quickly here, but how do they also drive risk? Well, we've talked a little bit about this weak intangible asset position and why you've got to be really cautious of some of the risks involved. Now, it's actually quite simple when you think about it. Every asset has risks associated with it. Coming from Australia, we have a bushfire season every year that's pretty harsh. You know, and anybody in the world could get their laptop stolen, their phone stolen, they get wallets stolen, they get their car stolen. So as human beings, biologically, we understand very well that the things we see and can touch have risks associated with it. Even your house could burn down or get flooded. That's a concept we understand very well. But intangible assets are actually no different. They have significant amount of risks attached to them. And again, using the same logic as before, if 90% of your company value is now intangible, well, that's where a lot of the key risks are going to be too. And as I said before, the intangible name in intangible assets tends to throw people off that they're not very important, whereas these risks are huge to the business. So take some of those below the water risks that are often unseen. Think tomorrow, if you're a data-led business, that your data gets stolen and you can't use it anymore. Now, this happens frequently. I've, previous to this role, was in PwC and spent some time in their cyber and digital and data trust business. And data theft and ransomware is a huge problem. So imagine tomorrow that you can't operate with your data anymore. No more pricing data, no more customer and supplier data. Imagine if you're a design-heavy business that your designs get stolen or leaked into the market. Imagine that you can't bottle up your confidential information and trade secrets are just flowing out the door. So these intangible assets present, if not protected properly or de-risked properly, present significant material risks to the business. And sadly, we actually see this play out all the time. Now, here are the top 5 risks that we see all the time. And just have a little bit of think about how you may or may not be exposed to this in your business. The number 1 risk by a mile is most organizations we see leak confidential information like a sieve. It's not always malicious. Sometimes it's employees, suppliers, customers actually positively advocating for the virtues of a particular product or service in a business. And unbeknownst to them, they're actually giving away key components of confidential information that to a savvy competitor can actually be used to undermine that product's performance in the marketplace or compete with it. So that's number 1. Secondly, there's chain of title. It's being able to prove that you own what you say you own, basically. Now, when you go seeking investment, one of the fairly common basic warranties that you'll be asked to attest to is that you own what you say you own. But we've encountered situations before where, say, an investor, an entrepreneur has started an idea. Let's just use software as an example and worked on some of the code. Then they've got a couple of contractors in to continue to sort of build out that code. Then one of those contractors have left and another owner has come on and started working on it. All of a sudden, you might have gone all the way through to commercialization, maybe even through Series A or bootstrapping, and you've got all of a sudden assigned this warranty that you own what you say you own. But do you actually own it? What rights do any number of those people who worked on it have to come back and say, no, actually, I own that bit, and I own that bit, and that was actually mine? This can cause an enormous amount of problems, litigation-wise, investment actually falling through because you can't actually warrant that or attest to that. So this is key, and it's one of the intangible asset categories that you can actually firm up right now, because early on in your development, you can actually put these things in place that can attest to chain of title of whatever you might be developing. Now, the third one there is is use of open source code software. We talk to many software developers and even businesses who have used open source to produce a piece of in-house software that's actually become quite valuable in the business. Now, open source is great, right? It can be used in lots of positive ways and has been great for the development of lots of different things, right? A lot of Microsoft's, what Microsoft produce and allow to be used is actually open source. But there have been occasions where there can be toxic license terms in there, which basically means, which in some cases has meant that, for example, the end product, if you use any percentage of this open source code software, the end product that you develop has to also be made available to everybody open source. There can be backdoors for malicious content and viruses in there. So it's worth actually being able to firm up particularly the license terms, particularly the key legal terms and license terms around open source code. Another one we see quite frequently is investing heavily in a brand that is not actually owned by the client. We recently had a client who spent millions of dollars trying to get out in front of their move to the US. They were investing in the brand visibility in there, and a simple freedom to operate search when they engaged us showed that they didn't actually have the right to use that brand. And ultimately how it turned out is that they had invested millions of dollars in a brand that they didn't own and had to start again. And of course, in many of these cases, there can be litigation. Now, litigation sometimes doesn't have to be real. It can just be the threat. And it takes many entrepreneurs and developers and business owners away from their core business of actually operating the company and growing the product. So in many cases, firming up your intangible asset position and de-risking that straight away through proper, be it trademark, be it patent, be it a better confidential information register, all of these sorts of things can be put in place and can combine to give you the proper protection that makes that fifth risk a lot less likely. So that's just a bit of an overview of the top 5 intangible asset risks we see. Now, just before I close, let me talk about their value, right? Because that's often what we get asked a lot about. If you take your organization and go and ask for a valuation right now, generally speaking, the world over, this is what's going to happen. They're going to ask for your tangible assets, what give them a worth. So your cars, your factory, your machinery, your laptops, cash on hand. They're going to ask for a cash flow, historical cash flows, and if you've got any future cash flows. They're going to look at a big spreadsheet here, the macroeconomic climate, the industry that you're in. And they're kind of going to come out with a formulaic number. It's going to spit out a number somewhere between 2 times and 9 times your EBITDA, and that's your value. The amount of times we get asked or to help an organization get past this because they feel that doesn't actually speak to their value and what is inherently in the business. And that's because this formulaic number doesn't speak to that strategic value there. In there is the inherent value and real material value of your intangible assets. Now, intangible assets, your brand, your data, your software, your relationships, your industry expertise, they are the only lever. That is all you have to push your organizational value above this formulaic measure. If you don't do that, you can't go to the top of the investment pile. Now, the sort of crazy venture capital valuations of 2022, they're a thing of the past. Whilst the crazy valuations aren't there, the money is still there. But investors are making entrepreneurs and organizations seeking investment work harder to show why they should go to the top of the pile. Otherwise, there's just a pile of organizations who've had this mechanistic value, and it's hard for not only you as the business owner to articulate your value and build a narrative around why you're special, but it's hard for the investor to see why you're special as well. That's why it's critical to be able to understand your intangible assets, assess them, protect them, right? Show how they're being commercialized, and then value the whole organization, your intangible assets included. Now, just like intangible assets can increase your valuation, they can also decrease it and destroy the value in there if it's not protected. So solely looking at numbers, just that quantitative analysis, that discounted cash flow, relief from royalty, cost to replicate, they're important metrics, but then they're not the only metrics. And quite frankly, the more intangible asset rich organizations get, the more or the less relevant just a quantitative metric gets. The real approach to look at, which is the approach we take, is to mix the quantitative number with two other approaches. One is a full qualitative analysis of your intangible assets and their intrinsic value. So that's secondly. And thirdly, a contextual valuation. Now, context is king. What I mean by that is if different assets are worth different things to different people, right? So we recently did a valuation for a large shopping center group owner, for example, and it turns out that the data, just that one intangible asset category, was worth more than all of the physical shopping centers put together. Now, contextually, that meant when we were selling this business, we didn't have to look just at other large shopping center group owners or people who are interested in a property play or looking for the operating company, but ones who could buy that digital asset, the pricing data, the demographic data, and they actually had bigger checkbooks, and we were able to sell the company for a lot more than it was originally valued at. That's that contextual value, but that can only be done if you understand your intangible assets and have valued them properly. So these are accurate, defensible valuations that we do all the time, that organizations use to actually raise capital off the back of and help you go to the top of the pile, because investors can then actually see the real value inside your organization. So what should you do? That's a bit of a whistle-stop tour. I've gone pretty quickly. Understand that there's a massive migration of value and risk. It's typically not reflected in the balance sheet or the P&L, and they're primarily driving your performance and risk and will drive it going forward. That trend is not going back. The global economy is only getting more digitized. It's only getting more intangible. And we can see that by the performance of the biggest organizations on the planet and how intangible they are. So what could you do to have a think about this? Well, start understanding your intangible assets. Form a list of them and prioritize that list. What's the most important? What's the sort of least important? What couldn't you do without as a good way to prioritize it? Develop a strategy to better protect them, assess them, and commercialize them. And think about how you can start to build a narrative around why they are so valuable. We can obviously help you to do that down the track when you want us to, and feel free to drop me an email or give me a call at any stage if you wanted to. I mean, this is quite general, obviously. We don't get the chance to talk about, your business in this context, and every business is unique in terms of their intangible assets. So one of the things we offer everybody we speak to is an hour complimentary to talk about this in the context of their business and the journey that you're on. So I would invite you to take us up on that if you think that would be valuable to you. I hope that was helpful. I'll hand back to Andy at this stage. And
so before we go on to the next phase, I just want to mention some of the organizations that help us put this event together that might be new to you. The first one is IIPCC Singapore, which stands for International Intellectual Property Commercialization Council, which is a global non-partisan, non-profit NGO that provides a platform for innovators, entrepreneurs to be able to commercialize their IP, understand the value of their IP, and realizing the commercial potential of their IP into product services that can benefit societies. Yeah, so there is a Singapore chapter that you can participate in the activities. And the other supporting partner we have is Pollinate, which is a joint initiative of Ngee Poly, Singapore Poly, Temasek Poly, and ITE, promote innovation, enterprise, entrepreneurship amongst the students and alumni. They have a space in One North JTC Launchpad, which is a very nice community supporting the growth of the entrepreneurship. Yeah, and lastly, mention Brands for Good, which is a organization promoting businesses that not only do well but also do good and make impact for society, supporting the SDG goals and positive impact to the growth of the social sector, the good of the people. Yeah, so that's Brands for Good. And now I'd like to invite Fu Kang to do a quick share on IPOS International. Then I will introduce our panelists.
Right, thanks very much, Andy. Also, I'll just make this quick. So I'm Chu Kang. I head the IP Strategy Solutions team in IPOS International. So at IPOS International, we are a fully owned subsidiary of the Intellectual Property Office of Singapore, or IPOS. So that's the government statutory board. So you go there to register your patents, your trademarks, whatever not. So they do the regulation, they do the policy. At IPOS International, we are the enterprise engagement arm. So on the enterprise-facing side, we have two key functions. One is an academy, the training function. We have things from all the way from like a one-day course that you can attend for basic IP knowledge, all the way to master's courses that we do together with the universities. For myself, I head a team of IP strategists. We run this program which we call IP Start. So that's how we got to know Andy as well. So this IP Start program is actually a program that we run for incubators and accelerators, right, to help them integrate IP elements into the program, pollinate some of our partners as well. The entire intention is to help startups be aware of IP and the value of IP and to learn about that right from the start, right? So you learn about IP alongside all the other business management topics as you go through the accelerator program, so that you can avoid a lot of mistakes that we see other companies making in terms of IP management, right? So we do talks like this, we join panels like this. So thanks to Andy for inviting us. We do one-to-one consultations as well. If you have any questions on IP management and if you need more targeted support, we do have something called the IP Ready program, where we really help build your internal IP management capabilities, right? Starting from identifying your IP, putting out a strategy, co-developing it with you, right, on how to manage it, and then eventually looking at, based on real use cases, right, providing training for your staff, right, whether for BD staff to learn some IP negotiation skills, maybe for your marketing folks to learn a bit of trademark search skills or branding skills, right, to really build up the internal capabilities for you to manage IP by yourself in the long run. Yep, so that's just a short introduction. Back to Andy.
Thank you, Tzu Kang. Yeah. We will be sharing slides and also the video and context of our speakers with you so that you can get in touch with them if you need any help. Yeah, and one of the reasons why we organized this session is that we are trying to bring awareness to our engineers, our technopreneurs on the importance of this intangible assets. And many of our engineering consulting companies also have intangible assets, and they need to also see the value of the work that they do and capture that in the activities that go forward. Yeah. So I think we have introduced Tzu Kang himself, Joel. I'll just invite Seong Yong to introduce himself. He is in the merger acquisition space and he's also one of our members of the IPCC. So yeah, Seong Yong would like to introduce yourself before we go into the panel discussion.
Yeah, hi Andy and everyone here. Thanks for having me on this panel. I run an organization called Valaris. We are in the business of marrying and divorcing businesses, right? So what that means on the marriage side is mergers and acquisitions, business valuations, and financial due diligence. On the divorce side, I'm a forensic accountant. I explain financial crime. And in the divorce side, I also value businesses, because whether it's a disputing shareholder or a high net worth couple, somebody is going to buy over somebody's shares, and I do economic damages. So that's what I do. And a lot of business, as what Joel has shared, is intangible, right? So if you are not an expert at looking at the invisible, you leave a lot of money on the table.
Thank you, Seong, for that. Yeah, I think in entrepreneurship, there's a lot of life cycle related. So we kind of groom the babies into toddlers, into teenagers and adult companies, while you marry and divorce them. So that's quite interesting. Okay, let's get into our panel discussion. Okay, feel free to ask any questions if you like to unmute and engage us in the online as well. You can do so. We have one question here for Joel from Devon. Yeah. So the question is, in the view of the value of intangible asset truly taken in consideration here with investors in Singapore, maybe reworded is in the eyes of investors, do they put proper value to intangible assets in the ecosystem in Singapore? Maybe also in the Joel's experience in the global market. Yeah.
Yes, they do. That's a great question. Yes, they do. In the past, it's been not that great. In the past, they haven't been that mature, if you like, at understanding it. And I'm picking on Singapore there. I'm saying the investor community as a whole. But there are some really savvy investors we're seeing, and this community is growing, that are progressively looking at intangible assets. As a matter of fact, we work with one private credit provider in Australia, and they pretty much only invest on, I mean, they're interested in cash flow, of course, but they pretty much only invest on the strength, either positively or negatively, of intangible assets. What I mean by that is how can they grow this quickly, or downside risk, if the whole thing fell over, what would this brand be worth, or the customer list be worth, etc. So investors are really starting to see the light, particularly because they're also looking for ways that they can better see beyond, better distinguish what a good opportunity is from a bad opportunity. Now, intangible assets are the way they do that, but the onus is still on the company, the person seeking investment, to be able to make that distinction. And when you cut through all the noise of investment, investors are only interested in two things. One, am I throwing my money away? So is this organization a safe place to put my money? Do they fully understand all of their business, their intangible assets, the market they're in, and do they have a good path to commercializing it, right? So is my money completely de-risked? And the second thing is, what's the best return on investment I can get? And if you can show that you can harness all of your intangible assets and you have the organization appropriately positioned behind it, that you're investing sensibly, then you go to the top of the pile, as it were, of the investment choices that they have to make, because they can see more clearly the role your intangible assets are playing, and therefore the way they can interact with it a bit better. Or they might have another strategic partner over here who can partner with you to take your, say, data set and use it over here and really accelerate it, grow it exponentially. So there is still some work to go. To circle back to your question, it can get better. Investors can get more, can get to understand it a little bit better, but the tide is turning and they are starting to look at it more, much more.
Okay. As a follow-up question, David is asking, how can we reach out to these investors with this like-minded appreciation of the value of intangible asset? I think maybe we can ask it in a different way. How do we help our companies to show that value? What are the steps we could take to properly put in numbers or supporting information that help our investors to see that value, whether they are very much familiar with intangible assets, or if they are not? How can we start them on that?
I don't know if some of the other panelists want to answer that, but I would simply say it starts at understanding it yourself, right? So you've got to fully understand what your intangible assets are. You've got to be able to, and that's what I sort of said before, and I'm sure IPOS would say the same, that once you wrap your head around it, understand the impact each of these are having in the business and their importance, and you've protected it, then you yourself can start to build a more intelligent narrative around why you're valuable. And that's where it starts, because if you can't explain adequately your intangible asset, your competitive edge and how it relates to your intangible assets, then no one else is going to be able to understand it either. So I would suggest starting at really understanding. So those 12 categories we put up, for example, really understanding what of those you have. What have you already invested in? To be successful, what are you going to need to invest in more? What perhaps can you invest in less? How can I protect it to make sure that it's not going to dilute my margin and market share? Then you have the foundation then to more confidently grow. And that then becomes more obvious to investors. Well, look how well these guys have leveraged their industry expertise. Why isn't there more competition in that area? Because they've completely protected their idea and they can own the margin or market share a lot more. That makes you very attractive to an investor.
To kind of add on, yeah.
Yeah, but to add to that, I mean, we worked with EverEdge for quite a long time actually. So we're quite aligned in the methodology. Definitely in terms of understanding and identifying our assets right from the start. That's the most important. Understanding yourself first, then you can narrate and articulate that to potential investors. I think that's the narrative of how your IP or intangible assets are linked, driving or supporting some of the competitive advantages as well as the future business plans. That's always the basis of talking about value. But I do want to make the point that value isn't always equal to a valuation. Many investors do look at IP as part of the value of the entire company, in the sense that while they may not per se require an IP valuation, right, they would look at in terms of for example, the financial projections of the company, right? How is that what are the assumptions made for those financial projections? And that's where how you manage your intangible assets, how you protect your IP become really important, because again, that's how you protect all the different competitive advantages. And if the investors don't even see that you have IP backing up some of your technology, especially if you're a deep tech startup, right, that's not going to work. You're not even get to the valuation stage. They're not going to take a look at the company in the first place. And maybe just back to the first question as well, in terms of whether investors do look at do value IP, right? I mean, just maybe out of the tech space, even there was this company, English Enrichment Center. They actually did the valuation of it. So they eventually sold the company. The boss sold it, and it was through that sort of being able to understand their key intangible assets, being able to articulate it. They actually got one of the highest multiples in terms of sales of their company in Singapore, and that's in Singapore, right? Which is and in many ways, our investors are really still catching up to looking at the value of IP.
So I'm going to take a contrarian approach to say investors are not interested in IP, right? I'll give you 3 different answers in 3 different hats, what exactly they are interested in. Why I say that is if you go to my LinkedIn profile, you'd see that I've got 3 different titles. I am an entrepreneur by vocation, I'm a mergers and acquisitions advisor by profession, and I'm a venture capitalist by mission. So the short answer as to what a venture capitalist like myself or what an investor wants to see when investing in a company is cash flow. Short answer. Okay. Now, a lot of IP heavy companies, especially if you're in the seed stage or Series A, you've got proof of concept, seed. You're looking to raise funds for product market fit, which is A, right? So you may not have a lot of cash flow, as in the case study that Joel has shown, which was Instagram, 20 months. And after the fact, back in 2014, Mark Zuckerberg bought an even larger company, right? He paid 20 times more for what he paid for Instagram than WhatsApp. So what investors want to actually see, regardless of what type of assets created, is cash flow, right? So where accountants are concerned, I'm a business valuer. There are only 3 types of assets, right? Tangible, financial, and intangible. The day and age in which business value was driven by tangible assets, the Rockefellers, the Carnegies, that's over, right? The day and age in which value is driven by financial assets has come and gone with Lehman Brothers, right? The go-go age of the hedge funds a decade ago that ended up with a great financial crisis in 2007. Going forward, the value is going to be driven by intangible assets. As any intangible asset valuer will tell you in the opening slide, they always show you that Ocean Tomo slide that 90% of value comes from intangible assets. And accountants, in reality, don't know what happens this, right? Because we only recognize 3 types of intangible assets. So the short answer is investors want to see cash flow. Now, I finished the answer as a venture capitalist. Now, if you're an entrepreneur and you don't have cash flow, the next best thing you can show is a path to profitability, right? In the next 12 months, in the next 24 months. To say that, then your pitch to them is, if you get in now, the valuation's low, you buy at a huge discount to true intrinsic value. But then the question is ring fencing about whether you can safely guarantee people or give them assurance that you will go safely from point A to point B. As an M&A advisor, the answer is very similar to EverEdge. If you do a multiple based on just existing cash flow, right, then what I say is you leave a lot of money on the table. Then it is for a good advisor to explain, hey, I know what you're doing, right? Yeah, why would Facebook pay $14 billion for WhatsApp in 2014 when they literally didn't make any money at all? They saw the value in data, right? So if you don't hire an advisor that can see what the buyer can see, but you can't, then you leave a lot of money on the table. I'll give you a very topical example. A friend of mine came to me and said that he was approached to sell his chicken rice chain, 5 shops in Singapore. Very, very topical and very small business. And somebody was offering him $20 million to buy his chain of 5 chicken rice stores in Singapore. And he said no matter how he did the math, he couldn't come up to a $20 million valuation. So I just asked one question, right? I said, where is this investor from? And the answer was, the investor was from China. So I said, he's not interested in operating your 5 chicken rice stores. He's interested in the fact that you are a heritage chicken rice brand in Singapore and taking that brand and selling that story to China. That's why it's worth more than $20 million. So that's the value of what an advisor is. You're right, he can see what the buyer is seeing in terms of the intangible, and a lot of it is intangible assets. And if you can't see it, then you've left billions of dollars on the table, right? Like, then you would say, okay, maybe WhatsApp's not worth a lot. I don't understand why Mark Zuckerberg would pay $14 billion for it. Yeah.
Thanks, Neil. Yeah. Okay. I think it's a lot of willing buyer, willing seller, and seller justifying their value through the assets they have. I think certainly some discovery and some digging could help at some point in time. Yeah, maybe we switch gears a little bit. We talk about consulting companies. Actually, ourselves, IES INCA is kind of a consulting company as well. So in the consulting company, Sean has a question here. Okay, so tangible assets in knowledge. Yeah, knowledge is in the employees that work for the companies. And then how can we value this kind of intangible asset? So employees come and go. And how do we capture or maintain and make sure this intangible assets in the work that they do as a consulting company gets properly valued? Yeah. And we like to try to address that. Yeah.
Yeah, we get this question quite a bit. The short answer is, the question we actually get asked is, are individuals intangible assets? And we say no, they create intangible assets. So what basically that means is it's incumbent on the organization to embed the knowledge of any one individual into the business, so that customers then follow the brand and the business rather than the individual. Now, in the environment I come from, in KPMG and PwC, that's crucial, because often big business will use their auditor or their tax advisor, and if that person is a partner in KPMG and leaves and goes to Deloitte, for example, quite often the business goes with them. So that person takes $20 million of business with them. Now, it doesn't matter if they've signed a non-compete clause or anything, because the customer gets to choose where they go. So they go with them. Now, I've seen that happen before. But the answer is that any knowledge that your staff have, any relationships that they have while they're in your organization, you have to embed in the process, you have to embed it into the organization. So it's the organization that owns it. Now, there'll be some leakage from time to time. There'll be some individuals who are just very, very good at their job, and there's only so much you can do to embed that that knowledge, that industry expertise that they have. But if you have the right processes in place, where the individuals have the ability to be able to do that, then the organization is growing as a result of these individuals rather than single point dependent on them. So the really smart consulting firms have, as part of their ongoing people management and processes, the ability to make sure they're codifying that knowledge from their employees into the organization rather than be just dependent on that individual choosing to stay or not.
Yep, maybe let me add to that as well and give a concrete example. The English Enrichment Center I mentioned earlier, in many ways, a lot of it depends on the pedagogy. A lot of it depends on the skills of the teachers. What they did really well was to codify a lot of knowledge into a marking database. And this is English enrichment. You can imagine how long they spend to mark papers. It's not like math, you just tick, right? And you can give comments, you get all these things, but then they had a really good database as a software to help teachers mark. And that was part of codifying the know-how into something that will make it a lot more scalable, and that's part of where the value comes from. And I will make another point to say that I think it's important at a certain point where the employees create certain proprietary knowledge or something, proprietary frameworks even, right? To distinguish confidential information from general know-how as well. Because when you have certain trade secrets or confidential information that can and should be maintained within the company, know-how is probably more general things that the employees will leave with. It's not a very clear line between the two. Sometimes you do have to make a bit of an assessment, but that is another perhaps imperfect way of trying to retain some of the know-how and to maintain some of the competitive advantages that the company gets from some of that know-how.
Thanks, Tukang. Okay, Tanjong, you have anything to add to that? Okay.
I wanted to say that you can only consider humans, human talent, company assets if you go back to the concept of slavery, right? I mean, you can't stop people from moving from one country to another country. So then it comes back to a legal and accounting definition when you want to look at what an asset is, because if you go with an accounting approach, which is in Financial Reporting Standards 38, right? There are 3 criteria for something to be a company asset, right? It needs to be identifiable or separable. So for example, if you have a brand, it's identifiable or separable. If you have a customer contract, it's identifiable and separable. That's the first criterion. The second criterion is whether there is economic benefit, right? For something to be an asset, just because you have a license, a driver's license, doesn't mean it's an asset. Because number one, you can't trade it. It's identifiable and separable, your driver's license, but there's no economic benefit to a driver's license, even though it's a license. A telecom license, on the other hand, is very valuable, right? Because it comes to the third criteria, which means having a license, especially if there's a fixed quota number of license, restricts other people from coming in to take away your economic benefit. That's why you tender for a license, right? Because you have access to economic benefit, and at the same time, you stop people from taking that economic benefit. 3 things, right? Identifiable, separable, economic benefit, and the right to restrict others from taking your economic benefit. You cannot apply these criteria to human beings, right? So that's the short answer.
Okay. Another way of looking at it, I would say, if a person is very valuable to the company, to kind of make them a partner or a ESOP or something, HR policy can help them to be retained and to keep that talent in their company so that they don't join a competitor or another bigger company which will end up eating up your business as well. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So you're right. We can quantify that, right? So when we do this sort of valuation exercises, after an acquirer buys a target, so let's say if the target is, the balance sheet is $10, but the acquirer paid $15, right? Then we have to account for the additional $5, right? Like what Joel showed in that chart. So in the past, before 2004, that $5 would be put in the books as goodwill. But after 2004, all the accountants got smarter and said, no, you can't. There is a reason why you pay extra, right? If you can't find the answer in 2023, it's called money laundering. I want to pay extra money, but I can't explain why I'm giving you extra money. It's called money laundering. So after 2004, the accountants came up with a new financial standard called FRS 103, business combinations. And that standard explains what that $5 is for. And a lot of it is intangible assets. Now, the intangible asset that comes with key men, right? Restricting the key men from joining a competitor, that intangible asset, we call it a non-compete agreement. And we are able to value that, right? Which is the difference between, the answer is the difference between the value of the business if that legal restraint, the non-compete agreement was in place, and if it was not. And the difference in the value of those two valuation scenarios is the value of the non-compete. Yeah.
Interesting. That's a very new knowledge to me. So maybe I'll just ask a general question. You know, a lot of our engineers, they create stuff, they create new designs, new engineering hardware solutions, and they have patented it. But they realize they don't have the funds to go commercialize it. And they really want to build something very innovative into the market and deliver into the market. And they try to raise funds, but they find that, hey, I spent a lot of money to build this pattern, this know-how and all that. Nobody seems to be able to give me money. What would be the strategy they should take? Should they just give up on their dream of building that solution? Should they try and raise money for it using their IP in maybe other countries which recognize this kind of IP as more valuable? Or what could they do? Maybe just an open question for the panelists.
Okay, so let me try to lead this, and other panelists can jump in. This is a very common problem with engineers, right? I say this because my first degree is not in accounting. My first degree is in engineering. I was a triple E engineer from NTU, and this is a very common problem because let me explain why engineers think like that, right? They always try to build a widget and then they run out of money. I'll use a very engineering example. If you have two pieces of software, one without any bugs and one with bugs, which one will succeed?
The one that can ship,
Yeah,
even with the bugs.
So all engineers will think that the software without any bugs is the clear winner, right? Why would the customer even want to consider the software without any bugs? So a lot of engineers, what they do is they spend all their budget, they spend all their money, and they spend all their energy trying to build a better mousetrap, then wonder why no customer rocks up and buys their product. Real life example, this is one of my favorite examples when Creative, for all of us old enough, Creative decided to go head-to-head with Apple in the iPod. Sim Wong-Hoo, the founder, took a very engineering approach. He said, we'll compete with Apple based on pricing, based on features, and based on flexibility. In fact, we even have two other cards in our back pocket. We have patents. They went to sue Apple for infringement of the iPod user interface because obviously we have better software. And they won, and Apple had to pay them $100 million. The second ace in their back pocket was we have a tie-up with Microsoft. In fact, we are the first mover because we have a tie-up with Microsoft to use Microsoft software, which is a portable video player in the iPod. Creative was the first to market with a video mobile player. But all of us know today, where is Creative Zen player versus the iPhone? So what happened, right? So when I first gave this talk at A-Star, within 10 minutes, all the PhD, there were 30 PhD in the room, all folded their arms. They didn't like what I was saying. That if you focus on features, flexibility, and pricing, you might still lose the war when you come against another guy, right? And to answer the question, how would an engineer, because I'm developing software myself, how would you have done it? The first thing is don't build the software, okay? Because they spend all their money at the seed stage trying to do proof of concept. The first thing you do is don't spend any time and energy hiring engineers building the software. The first thing you should do is go talk to your customer, right? Don't spend 1,000 hours building something and then you ask your customer and nobody wants to buy. First thing to do is hold meetings and collect responses from 100 ideal customers and ask for two things. Just ask for two things. What is urgent and what is important problem for me to fix in your organization? Because if it's urgent, but not important, they got no funds, they won't pay for it. If it's important but not urgent, it can wait, right? So I think I'll stop there in terms of what you should do. Don't build anything. Talk to 100 customers, ask them what's an important and urgent problem to solve in your organization today.
Ask them to pay a deposit for that urgent problem if they want the solution. Okay, thank you for that answer, Seong Yung. Yeah. Joel, has anything to add to that? Yeah.
No, I actually think it's actually a really good example. And one of the tricky things can be, being very confident in, that this is going to solve a real problem or it will really disrupt this market, but not being able to think through the logic of getting the next few steps. So I completely agree.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, we have one more question from Devon. Business know-how, business strategy, design strategy. Okay, business know-how and strategy, I think two different things. Can they be secured as intangible assets? Yeah. Maybe Joel would like to address that. Yeah.
Yeah, they absolutely can. I mean, business strategy should be confidential information, and it obviously is part of the organization, and it goes right to the heart of the journey that the organization's on. So it's more fundamental to the fabric of the organization, but certainly business know-how, industry expertise in that sort of category. Yeah, that's absolutely an intangible asset. I mean, we think of it this way: when an organization goes to market and an investor comes in and says, "Yep, we'll buy this organization," but the owner, they have to stay for 2 or 3 years. I mean, effectively what they're saying is that they need that 2 or 3 years to take out that industry expertise, that know-how, and embed it into the organization. So they're buying themselves that period of grace. Now, think of it another way. Well, to put it in sort of material or value terms, let's pretend they didn't do that. The owner just left, and now they've got to replicate that or try and make up that difference. So that gives you an indication that it obviously does have a value. The challenge then is making sure that it's valued correctly.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments from the panelists? Yeah.
Yeah, I'll just add on that. I mean, a lot of things are like what you really think is the more intangible, right? The know-how, the strategies, all this can be classified as well. I think sometimes just a mindset shift away from the more traditional types of IP, patents, trademarks. You probably can't get any sort of registration for those. But in terms of managing those, and we look at a broader class of intangible assets, definitely, I think those you can protect, those you can identify. And just to sell a bit of Koyo, recently, in collaboration with a couple of other agencies, we released something called the Intangibles Disclosure Framework. It is not a valuation guideline, but it's really just a reference on how to disclose the intangibles. And I think the categories of intangibles there can also serve as a good reference for companies out there looking to identify their intangible assets.
Yeah. Okay, I think we have addressed as many of the questions we could. It was a really exciting sharing by all our panelists, and really, I think Singapore is getting to the point where we have all these structures in place to put value on the knowledge economy, on the intangible assets created by the innovators and also the technopreneurs. Yeah. So yeah, let's stay connected. We'll just officially end the event here, but those who like to hang around and chat a bit more, please do. And then, yeah, feel free to turn on your video and we can talk a little bit more. But I really thank our panelists for your insights, very candid and very real into helping our audience understand what they can do to build a strong business. Thank you so much, everybody, for being here.